The server room hummed with the steady rhythm of cooling fans as Maya Chun traced the network failure to its source. 3 hours the base IT team had spent chasing phantom errors through the system before someone thought to call the contractor. She isolated the corrupted routing table in 40 minutes, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency while the equipment racks cast shadows across her workspace. The door opened without warning. Lieutenant Derek Brennan entered with 2 sergeants trailing behind him, their boots heavy on the tile floor. He glanced at the diagnostic screens without understanding what they displayed, then turned his attention to Maya with barely concealed dismissal. "You found the problem yet?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted she would. Maya kept her eyes on the monitor as she explained the routing table corruption and the solution she was implementing. The technical details seemed to bounce off him like rain on steel. "Look," he interrupted, "we need this fixed, but I don't need the whole technical lecture. Just do whatever you contractors do and get it working." His sergeants shifted their weight behind him, exchanging glances that suggested they had witnessed this dynamic before. Maya's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. "The solution will take another 20 minutes to implement and verify," she said, her voice level and professional despite the edge in his tone. "The backup systems will need testing to ensure the corruption hasn't spread." Brennan leaned against one of the equipment racks with his arms crossed. 20 minutes, he repeated, as if he were granting permission rather than acknowledging her timeline. "You know, back when I was stationed in Germany, our military IT guys could fix these issues in half that time. But I guess that's the difference between trained soldiers and civilian contractors." The comment hung in the air between them. Maya saved her progress and turned to face him directly, her posture straight and her expression neutral. The corruption affected 17 routing nodes across 3 separate network segments. She explained without defensiveness. "Military or civilian. The repair time is determined by the scope of the damage, not the technician's employment status." He pushed off from the rack with a laugh that his sergeants echoed half a second too late. "Sure, whatever you say. Just make sure it's done right. We can't have a network going down again because someone took shortcuts." He moved toward the door, then paused as if remembering something. "Oh, and when you're done here, we've got some equipment inventory that needs updating in Building 6. Spreadsheet work? Pretty basic stuff. Should be right up your alley." Maya recognized the assignment for what it was. Building 6 house supply logistics, nowhere near her actual job responsibilities for network infrastructure. The task he described could be handled by any junior enlisted soldier with basic computer skills, but he was assigning it to her anyway. She acknowledged the order with a simple understood and returned to her work. The door closed behind them, and the server room returned to its mechanical symphony of fans and drives. Maya's hands resumed their efficient movement across the keyboard, but something in her eyes suggested layers beneath the surface that Lieutenant Brennan had never bothered to look for. The routing repair completed in 18 minutes. Later that evening, the contractor quarters offered little relief from the day's interactions. Maya sat on her bunk reviewing security protocols on her tablet, while 3 other contractors debated the merits of various duty stations they had worked. The conversation flowed around her until Sarah Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, directed a question her way. "Hey Maya, where are you from originally?" Sarah asked, looking up from the novel she had been pretending to read. "You've got that look like you've been around more bases than the rest of us combined." Maya considered the question, weighing how much background to share in casual conversation. "Military family," she said simply. "Grew up moving between bases. Spent time at Bragg, Benning, overseas rotations in Germany and Korea. You develop a certain familiarity with how things work." The other contractors nodded with understanding born from similar experiences. Sarah leaned forward with her interest clearly engaged. "That explains why you never seem rattled by anything here. I swear, some of these officers act like we're barely qualified to plug in a computer, but you just roll with it." "It's the nature of the work," Maya replied, her tone suggesting the conversation was reaching its natural end. "Contract work has its own challenges regardless of location." She returned her attention to the tablet, and the others gradually resumed their previous discussion. The evenings settled into routine patterns. Maya completed her review of the security protocols, noting several outdated procedures that the base staff had not updated despite recent policy changes. She made encrypted notes for her own reference, then secured her tablet in the small locker beside her bunk. The physical training schedule she maintained called for an early start the next morning, long before most of the base stirred to life. Sleep came easily despite the day's frustrations. Years of discipline had taught her to separate professional irritation from personal equilibrium, to recognize that assumptions and dismissals said more about those who made them than about their targets. Lieutenant Brennan's attitude was not unique in her experience, nor would it be the last time someone underestimated her capabilities based on incomplete information. The server room would need monitoring over the next 48 hours to ensure the routing repair held under full network load. Building 6 and its inventory spreadsheet would consume several hours of her time tomorrow, menial work assigned to keep her busy rather than to serve any genuine operational need. The base continued its mission regardless of internal friction, and Maya Chun continued her work with the same steady professionalism that had defined her approach to every assignment she had ever accepted. The night deepened across the forward operating base, sentries walking their posts along the perimeter while the interior buildings glowed with scattered windows of light. Maya's breathing slowed into the measured rhythm of rest, her mind filing away the day's events into their proper context. The routing table was fixed, the network stable, and tomorrow would bring its own set of challenges to navigate with the same quiet competence she had demonstrated for longer than anyone on this base realized. The morning briefing room filled with personnel as the 0700 meeting approached. Maya arrived 10 minutes early with her security badge displayed and her tablet containing the network status reports Colonel Vance had specifically requested. She took a seat along the wall, where contractors typically position themselves during mixed briefings, close enough to hear, but separate from the main table where military personnel gathered. Lieutenant Brennan entered with his usual entourage, scanning the room before his eyes landed on Maya. He approached with purpose, his expression already set in disapproval. "This is a security briefing," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Contractors don't have clearance for operational discussions." Maya kept her tone, even as she responded. "Colonel Vance requested my presence for the network security portion. The system access report requires technical context." She held up her tablet showing the email chain, but Brennan waved it off without reading. "The colonel can get your report in writing," he said, gesturing toward the door. "We'll call you back in if we need clarification on anything." His sergeants stood behind him with expressions that suggested they found nothing unusual about the exchange. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb watched the interaction from his position near the front of the room. His role in base security meant he attended most briefings, and he had noticed Maya's name on the distribution list that morning. More significantly, he had reviewed her system access credentials the previous week during a routine audit. Contractors with her level of clearance typically had compelling reasons for that access, reasons that usually meant they belonged in security discussions rather than outside them. Maya rose without argument and collected her materials. Lieutenant Brennan held the door open with exaggerated courtesy as she exited, then closed it firmly behind her. The briefing proceeded without her network security report, forcing Colonel Vance to table that portion of the discussion until she could provide written documentation instead. Webb made a mental note of the exchange. Protocol existed for excluding personnel from briefings, but those protocols typically involved actual security concerns rather than blanket contractor dismissal. Maya Chin's clearance level matched or exceeded half the people in the room, yet Brennan had removed her based solely on her employment status. The morning continued with Maya navigating the increased checkpoint procedures Brennan had instituted 3 weeks earlier. Her badge now required verification at 4 separate points between the contractor quarters and the server room, each one adding 5 minutes to her commute across base. The military personnel she passed moved through these same checkpoints with simple badge scans, but contractors faced additional verbal confirmation and log entries. The third checkpoint guard, a young specialist named Torres, processed her credentials with apologetic efficiency. "New protocols, ma'am," he explained, though they both knew the protocols were not particularly new anymore. "Lieutenant Brennan wants everything documented." Maya offered him a brief smile that conveyed understanding without complaint. "Just following orders," she said, and moved through once her clearance registered green on his scanner. The delay had become routine enough that she built the extra 20 minutes into her schedule each morning. The officer's mess at midday provided Lieutenant Brennan with an audience for his ongoing commentary. He sat with Captain Morris from logistics, their conversation drifting across topics until it settled on contractor oversight. "You have to stay on top of them," Brennan said, cutting into his meal with emphasis. "They're not military, so they don't have that inherent discipline. Give them an inch and they'll cut corners every time." Morris nodded along while checking his phone. "We've had pretty good luck with our contractors," he offered. "Most of them know their jobs better than we do, honestly." Brennan's expression suggested disagreement. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "They know their technical jobs, sure, but they don't understand operational security or the bigger picture. That's why we need the extra verification steps, the additional oversight. Can't just let them wander around like they own the place." Maya entered the mess hall as his words carried across the space between tables. She maintained her path to the serving line without visible reaction, collected her meal, and found a seat near the far wall. The conversation at Brennan's table shifted to other topics, but the message had been clearly delivered to anyone within earshot. Webb arrived at the security office that afternoon to find Maya waiting with the written network report Colonel Vance had requested. She handed him the tablet with the documentation already prepared, formatted according to military standards despite her civilian status. He skimmed the executive summary and noted the level of detail she had included, technical specifications presented in language that both IT personnel and command staff could understand. "Thank you for getting this turned around so quickly," Webb said, genuinely appreciative of the efficiency. "The colonel needs this for the evening brief with regiment." He paused, then added, "I noticed you were on the distribution list for this morning's meeting." Maya's expression remained neutral. "Lieutenant Brennan felt my presence wasn't necessary," she said without elaboration or complaint. "The written report should provide the needed information." Webb studied her for a moment, noting the way she stood with perfect posture and economical movement, the way her eyes tracked the room with awareness that seemed more tactical than casual. Her response to Brennan's dismissal carried no frustration or resentment, just professional acceptance that struck him as unusual for someone facing repeated obstacles to doing their job effectively. "I'll make sure the colonel gets this within the hour," he said, and Maya nodded her thanks before departing. Webb watched her navigate the corridor with that same precise bearing, then turned his attention to the report itself. The network security analysis revealed 3 potential vulnerabilities she had identified and already patched, work that had been completed over the previous 72 hours without fanfare or requests for recognition. Evening brought Maya to the base gym during off-peak hours when fewer personnel used the facilities. She moved through her routine with focused intensity, her workout regimen more demanding than typical contractor fitness maintenance. The weight selections and exercise combinations suggested someone maintaining combat readiness rather than general health, though anyone watching might attribute it to personal preference rather than professional requirement. Webb happened through on his way to the security office night shift and paused at the gym entrance. Maya executed a series of pull-ups with strict form, her breathing controlled and her movements efficient. 20 repetitions without struggle or strain, followed by a transition to box jumps that demonstrated explosive power and coordination. She moved like someone who had spent years conditioning their body for specific performance requirements, not like someone whose primary job involved sitting at computer terminals. He continued to his office without interrupting her training, but the observation joined the growing collection of inconsistencies he had noticed. Contractors came in many varieties, from former military seeking stable employment to technical specialists who had never worn a uniform. Maya Chun appeared to be something different, something that did not quite align with her official role or the dismissive treatment she received from personnel like Lieutenant Brennan. The base settled into its evening rhythm as Maya completed her workout and returned to the contractor quarters. Sarah and the others had gathered for their usual evening card game, and they invited her to join with friendly insistence. She declined politely, citing early morning obligations, and spent the remaining hours before sleep reviewing training materials on her tablet that had nothing to do with network infrastructure or IT systems. The documents she studied carried classification markings that would have surprised anyone who believed she was simply a civilian contractor hired for technical support. But those documents remained secured behind encrypted access, visible only to her, and Maya had long ago mastered the art of maintaining separation between her official cover and her actual background. Lieutenant Brennan's dismissiveness was inconvenient but manageable, one more operational challenge to navigate until circumstances changed or her assignment concluded. Outside her window, the base continued its mission under darkness. Sentries walked their routes, operations centers maintained communications with higher command, and the network she had repaired that morning carried data across secure channels without interruption. Maya's role in maintaining that infrastructure was real enough, even if it was not the complete story of who she was or what she had done before accepting this particular assignment. The explosion tore through the perimeter fence at 2200 hours, the blast wave rattling windows across the forward operating base. Maya's hands froze over her keyboard in the server room as the building shuddered, her mind processing the sound signature and calculating distance in the fraction of a second before the base alarm began its wailing cry. Her posture transformed instantly. The relaxed efficiency of a contractor working late became something else entirely, something coiled and ready. She saved her work with 3 keystrokes, locked the terminal, and moved toward the door with purpose that had nothing to do with evacuation procedures and everything to do with years of ingrained response to contact. The corridors filled with personnel rushing toward designated positions as the alarm continued its rotation through warning tones. Maya moved against the flow with calculated navigation, her path taking her toward the armory rather than away from danger. Around her, soldiers shouted coordinates and status reports into radios while the base transitioned from routine evening operations to combat response unfolded with practice chaos. Staff Sergeant Webb reached the security center as the first reports flooded the communications network. Perimeter breach, southwest quadrant. His radio crackled with transmission from the guard towers. Multiple hostiles, estimate 30+. Heavy weapons confirmed. The screens before him lit with camera feeds, showing figures in dark clothing cutting through the damaged fence line and spreading into the base complex with tactical precision. He keyed his radio to broadcast on the security channel. All posts, this is Webb. We have confirmed hostile breach, southwest sector. Rules of engagement are active. Repeat, ROE active. Get QRF mobilized and get me eyes on their advance. In the command center, Colonel Patricia Vance absorbed the incoming information with the calm that came from 3 decades of military service. The duty officer provided rapid updates while she pulled up the base schematic on the main display. The breach point gave the attackers direct access to 3 critical buildings, including communications and the vehicle depot. She reached for the phone, connecting her to regimental headquarters as the first casualty reports began arriving. Lieutenant Brennan stood in the supply depot with 6 soldiers who had been conducting evening inventory when the explosion hit. The building shook hard enough to knock equipment from shelves, and the immediate silence that followed the blast felt heavier than the noise itself. Then the alarm started, and Brennan's face went pale as he processed what was happening. "Get to the arms room," he shouted at the nearest sergeant. "We need weapons now." His hands shook as he pulled his sidearm from its holster, and the soldiers around him moved with urgency that bordered on panic. The supply depot sat less than 200 meters from the breach point, close enough that the sound of automatic weapons fire became audible through the walls within seconds of the alarm. Maya reached the armory as a specialist was distributing rifles to the quick reaction force. She approached the counter with her contractor badge visible. and the specialist looked at her with confusion that bordered on dismissal. "Ma'am, you need to get to the shelter areas," he said, already turning to the next soldier in line. She leaned forward and spoke quietly, but with absolute clarity. "Authorization code Delta 77 Alpha Mike. Override civilian status. Operational emergency protocol." The words carried weight that made the specialist pause and reach for his verification tablet. He entered the code, and his eyes widened as the system registered her clearance level and flagged her file with classifications he had never seen on a contractor profile. "What do you need, ma'am?" he asked, his tone completely changed. Maya's response was precise and unhesitating. M4 carbine with reflex sight, 6 magazines, tactical vest, sidearm with 3 magazines, and communications headset on security frequency. The specialist moved to comply immediately, gathering equipment with hands that worked faster than his mind could process what was happening. Webb coordinated the initial response from the security center, watching camera feeds as the hostiles advanced through the base with clear objectives. They were moving toward the command center and communications building, bypassing other structures in favor of high-value targets. His radio crackled with reports of engagement as the quick reaction force made contact, but the attackers had numbers and the advantage of surprise. A new transmission cut through the chatter, and Webb almost missed it in the chaos of overlapping voices. "This is Chun," the voice said with calm authority that seemed incongruous given the circumstances. "I have visual on hostile element advancing on grid 7-4. 3 targets with RPG, engaging now." The transmission ended with the sharp crack of rifle fire, followed by 3 distinct impacts that Webb recognized as accurate shooting rather than spray and pray desperation. He pulled up the camera feed for grid 7-4 and saw 3 bodies on the ground near a corner of the communications building. A figure in tactical vest moved past them with weapon raised, checking corners with textbook precision before advancing. The figure was small, efficient in movement, and wore contractor clothing beneath the vest. Webb's mind struggled to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew about Maya Chun. Colonel Vance received the first confused reports from personnel in the field. "Ma'am, we have a contractor engaging hostiles," one squad leader transmitted with audible bewilderment in his voice. "She just dropped 3 of them and is moving to support our position. She's got proper kit, and she's operating like special operations. What are our orders?" Vance looked at her operations officer with raised eyebrows. "Get me identification on that contractor," she said, already suspecting what the answer would be. "And make sure our people know she's friendly. Last thing we need is blue on blue because someone doesn't recognize her status." Maya moved through the base infrastructure with intimate knowledge of its layout. She had spent 3 months studying these buildings and corridors for her cover assignment. But the way she used that knowledge now revealed training that went far beyond memorizing network closet locations. She flowed from cover to cover, her weapon tracking potential threat vectors as she closed the distance on a group of hostiles attempting to reach the command center. The attackers numbered 6 and carried enough firepower to pose serious problems for the undermanned defensive positions. Maya assessed angles and timing with calculations that happened beneath conscious thought, muscle memory from countless engagements taking over while her conscious mind tracked the larger tactical situation. She keyed her radio and spoke in clipped phrases that carried maximum information with minimum transmission time. "Chun to any friendly unit's vicinity command center. 6 hostiles advancing from northeast, heavily armed. I'm flanking from there 4 o'clock. Hold fire on that approach for 30 seconds. She didn't wait for confirmation before moving into position, her faith in military discipline absolute, even as she operated outside normal command structure. Webb acknowledged her transmission and passed the warning to units in the area. The security cameras showed Maya's approach from an angle the hostiles had left unguarded, their focus entirely on the command center's front entrance. She reached optimal position and opened fire with controlled bursts that dropped 2 targets before the others realized the threat axis had changed. The remaining 4 hostiles turned to engage her, but Maya had already shifted position behind a concrete barrier. Their return fire sparked off stone while she assessed their new positions and calculated her next move. The defenders at the command center used the distraction to advance from their positions, catching the hostiles in a crossfire that ended the engagement within seconds. Brennan heard the gunfire intensifying near his position and made a decision born from terror rather than tactical sense. "We need to move," he told his soldiers. "Get to the command center where there's real security." The group abandoned the supply depot and rushed into the open spaces between buildings, their movement loud and panicked enough to draw attention from a squad of hostiles who had been advancing on a parallel route. The attackers opened fire and Brennan's group scattered. 2 soldiers went down in the initial burst, and the lieutenant found himself pinned behind a vehicle with rounds impacting the metal frame above his head. His radio transmitted fragments of desperate calls for help while his hands struggled to return effective fire. Maya heard the transmission and saw the situation develop on her mental map of the base. She was 200 meters away with multiple obstacles between her position and Brennan's, but the tactical mathematics were simple enough. She sprinted across open ground with speed that came from endless conditioning, her path taking her through shadows and covered approaches that minimized her exposure while maximizing forward progress. She reached a position with angle on the hostile squad and dropped into a stable firing stance. The targets were engaged with Brennan's group and never saw her arrive. Maya's rifle barked 4 times in rapid succession, each shot placed with precision that came from thousands of hours on ranges and in real combat. 4 hostiles fell, and the remaining 2 broke contact, retreating toward the perimeter rather than facing the new threat. Brennan looked up from his cover to see a figure in tactical vest approaching with weapon raised. The figure cleared the area with professional efficiency, checked his wounded soldiers with quick assessment, and keyed a radio to call for medical support. Only when the figure turned toward him did Brennan recognize Maya Chun, and his mind simply refused to process what his eyes were telling him. Maya moved past Brennan without acknowledging his shock, her attention focused on the 2 wounded soldiers bleeding onto the pavement. She dropped to one knee beside the first casualty and assessed the gunshot wound with hands that knew exactly what to look for. "Through and through, right shoulder," she announced in her radio. "Bleeding controlled, needs evac, but stable." The second soldier had taken rounds to the leg, and Maya applied a tourniquet with practiced efficiency while calling in grid coordinates for medical response. Brennan found his voice somewhere between disbelief and the immediate crisis. "You," he started, then stopped as Maya's head snapped toward movement in the shadows 30 meters away. She raised her rifle in one smooth motion and fired twice, dropping a hostile who had been attempting to flank their position. The body fell, and Maya returned her attention to the wounded soldier as if the interruption had been nothing more than swatting an insect. "Stay with them," she told Brennan, her tone carrying command authority that had no business coming from a contractor. "Medical is 2 minutes out. Keep pressure on his leg wound." She was already moving before he could respond, flowing back into the darkness with her weapon raised and her movements economical. Staff Sergeant Webb watched the engagement unfold through multiple camera feeds, his mind working to reconcile the contractor he thought he knew with the operator moving through his screens with lethal precision. Maya advanced on a cluster of hostiles attempting to breach the communications building, her approach using cover and concealment that spoke to advanced tactical training. She keyed her radio with updates that were clipped and professional, feeding information into the security net with the timing of someone who understood battlefield communications. "Hostile element, communications building east entrance," she transmitted. 4 targets with demo charges. Engaging. Webb watched her weapon flash in the darkness for distinct bursts that dropped 3 hostiles while the 4th scrambled for cover. Maya shifted position before return fire could find her, flanking the remaining hostile and eliminating him with a single shot that demonstrated marksmanship far beyond basic qualification standards. Colonel Vance stood in the command center receiving updates that seemed to defy logical explanation. The contractor, Chun, she's eliminated 8 confirmed hostiles, her operations officer reported while checking his tablet against radio transmissions. She's coordinating with QRF elements and calling in accurate tactical intelligence. Ma'am, she's operating like Tier 1 Special Operations. Vance pulled up Maya's personnel file on her screen and scanned the limited information available. The clearance level had always struck her as unusually high for an IT contractor, but the background check had come through DoD channels with all the proper authorization codes. Now those authorization codes took on new meaning as she watched security footage of Maya moving through the base with combat efficiency that rivaled her best special operations personnel. "Give me a secure line to JSOC," Vance ordered. "I need to know who this contractor really is, and I need to know now. Until then, make sure all units know she's friendly and coordinate with her instead of questioning her presence." Maya reached a defensive position near the vehicle depot where 3 soldiers had been pinned down by hostile fire from an elevated position. She assessed the situation with a glance, noted the angles and cover, and formulated a plan that took perhaps 2 seconds to develop. She keyed her radio and spoke directly to the squad leader, whose voice she recognized from earlier transmissions. "This is Chun. I'm approaching your position from the south. The hostiles on your northeast are elevated, 2nd-story window. I'm going to draw their fire. You push forward and take them from below. On my mark." She didn't wait for agreement, trusting that competent soldiers would recognize a viable plan when they heard one. She broke from cover and sprinted across open ground, her movement drawing immediate fire from the elevated position. Rounds sparked off concrete behind her as she dove behind a vehicle, and the 3 pinned soldiers used the distraction exactly as she had predicted. They advanced with covering fire that forced the hostiles to split their attention, and within seconds the elevated threat was neutralized through combined action. The squad leader jogged to Maya's position with gratitude and confusion competing for dominance on his face. "Thanks for the assist," he said, then paused as he tried to figure out how to address her. "Ma'am, I don't know what your story is, but that was professional work." Maya checked her magazine and performed a tactical reload, her response focused on the immediate situation rather than explanations. "We still have hostiles on base," she said simply. "Your squad should reinforce the command center perimeter. I'm moving to clear the northern sector." She was gone before he could ask the questions forming in his mind, her figure disappearing into the shadows with weapon raised. Webb coordinated the defense from the security center, watching Maya's icon on his tactical display move through the base with purpose. She had eliminated 12 confirmed hostiles at this point, disrupted multiple attack elements, and coordinated with friendly units using proper radio procedures and tactical terminology. He pulled her personnel file again and studied the sparse details with growing certainty that nothing in the official record was complete or accurate. The northern sector held 2 buildings that provided strategic positions for hostile forces attempting to maintain their foothold on base. Maya approached with caution that came from recognizing the tactical value of the structures. She spotted movement in a ground floor window and paused behind cover to assess the situation. 3 hostiles inside, weapons trained on the approach routes, clearly positioned to ambush responding forces. She keyed her radio and transmitted a situation report to Webb. "Security Center, this is Chun. I have 3 hostiles fortified in Building 12, Grid 6-8. They're covering the northern approach. Request any units in vicinity hold position while I clear." The transmission was professional, calm, and utterly confident in a way that suggested she had done exactly this type of work many times before. Webb acknowledged her transmission and watched the camera feeds. Maya circled the building with patient movement, checking angles and identifying a service entrance that offered access without exposing her to the fortified positions. She entered with weapon raised, her movement through the interior tracked by the limited cameras available. The sound of gunfire erupted briefly, 3 sharp bursts followed by silence. "Building 12 clear," Maya transmitted 30 seconds later. 3 hostile Kia. Continuing northern sweep. She exited the structure and moved deeper into the sector, her path taking her toward the perimeter where the initial breach had occurred. Brennan remained with the wounded soldiers until medical teams arrived, his hands still shaking from adrenaline and shock. The medics loaded both casualties on his stretchers while asking him what happened, and Brennan found himself unable to articulate a response that made sense. "A contractor saved us," he finally managed. "Maya, Chun." She killed 4 of them and stabilized the wounded before moving on like it was routine. The medics exchanged glances but said nothing as they worked. Word had spread through the base about the contractor engaging hostiles with professional precision, transmitted through informal channels faster than official communications. Brennan stood alone after the medical team departed, his sidearm still in his hand, and his mind struggling to reconcile every interaction he had had with Maya against what he had just witnessed. Maya reached the perimeter breach point and found evidence of the hostile withdrawal. Blood trails and discarded equipment marked their retreat, suggesting the attack had been a raid rather than an attempt to hold ground. She cleared the immediate area and established observation position with clear sight lines to the damaged fence section. Her radio continued to monitor security frequency, tracking the base defensive response and providing updates when she spotted movement beyond the perimeter. The firefight intensity decreased as hostile forces either withdrew or were neutralized. Maya counted the time since the initial breach and estimated the enemy had achieved perhaps 30% of their objectives before the defense consolidated. The attack had been well planned, but had met unexpected resistance from both quick reaction force elements and from her own intervention. Colonel Vance received the preliminary casualty count with relief that it was not worse. 15 wounded, 3 critical for dead. Against an attacking force of 30-plus hostiles, the numbers represented a defensive success built on rapid response and accurate fire. She studied the tactical map, showing hostile elimination locations, and saw a clear pattern. Nearly half the confirmed enemy kills were attributed to a single individual, a civilian contractor who appeared on the roster as basic IT support. The secure line to JSOC connected with a voice that identified itself simply as Operations Officer. Colonel Vance explained the situation in precise language, describing the combat performance she had witnessed and requesting clarification on Maya Chen's actual background and status. The operations officer listened without interruption, then asked Vance to stand by while he consulted classified files. When he returned, his tone carried weight that suggested significant information being carefully metered. "Colonel, Maya Chun is former Delta Force, 12 years of service with classified operational history. Medical retirement 18 months ago following combat injury sustained protecting her team during classified operation. Her contractor position is legitimate, but also serves as cover for continued service in advisory capacity. Her combat capability is exactly what you witnessed. That's all I can tell you on this line." Vance absorbed the information and glanced at her operations officer who had been listening on speaker. "Understood," she said. "Were my orders regarding her status and the current situation. Maintain her cover publicly," the JSOC officer replied. "Privately, coordinate with her as you would any special operations asset on your base. She has full authority to engage threats and lead tactical elements if circumstances require. Further details will be transmitted through secure channels." The line disconnected, leaving Vance with answers that created as many new questions as they resolved. Maya observed the perimeter from her concealed position, watching for any indication the hostile force might attempt a second wave. The base had settled into defensive posture with quick reaction force elements establishing strong points and casualty collection proceeding under careful security. Her radio traffic monitor showed organized response replacing initial chaos, but she maintained her position because experience had taught her that determined attackers often tested defenses multiple times before fully withdrawing. Movement caught her attention near the breach point. 6 hostiles emerged from cover beyond the fence line, advancing with caution that suggested reconnaissance rather than assault. Maya keyed her radio and transmitted coordinates along with threat assessment. Security center, hostiles probing the breach point, 6 targets moving tactical. They're testing our response posture. Recommend holding fire until they commit to entry. Webb acknowledged her transmission and alerted perimeter guards to maintain fire discipline. He watched through camera feeds as Maya adjusted her position to improve her angle on the advancing hostiles. The attackers reached the fence line and paused, clearly evaluating the defensive preparations visible from their position. One of them raised what appeared to be a radio, likely reporting back to whoever commanded this operation. Maya made her decision based on tactical calculation. The hostile with the radio represented intelligence gathering that would inform future attacks. She settled her rifle sights, controlled her breathing, and fired. The target dropped, and the remaining 5 hostiles scattered, returning fire toward her position while attempting to recover their fallen comrade. Maya shifted behind cover as rounds impacted near her previous location, then emerged from a different angle and engaged the scattered targets with methodical precision. 4 more hostiles fell in rapid succession, their tactical formation broken by the sudden sniper fire from an unexpected position. The remaining hostile abandoned the recovery attempt and fled into the darkness beyond the perimeter. Maya tracked him through her optic but held fire, allowing him to retreat and carry word back to his commanders about the base's defensive capability. That's 5 more confirmed, she transmitted to Webb. 1 hostile withdrew, carrying intelligence about her posture. Breach point is clear. She maintained observation for another 2 minutes before concluding the immediate threat had passed. Her weapon carried 17 confirmed eliminations at this point, a number that would have been remarkable for a platoon engagement and was extraordinary for a single operator. Colonel Vance received reports from multiple sectors indicating the hostile force had withdrawn completely. The attack had lasted 40 minutes from initial breach to final contact, compressed violence that had tested her base defense but ultimately failed to achieve enemy objectives. She studied the elimination map and saw Maya's call sign markers scattered across the entire engagement area, present at every critical moment where hostile elements had threatened to overwhelm defensive positions. "Give me Chin's location," Vance ordered her operations officer. "I want her brought to the command center for debrief once we've confirmed all clear. And make sure whoever retrieves her understands she's to be treated with full respect. No more contractor dismissal from anyone on this base." Maya cleared her weapon and began the movement back toward the base interior, her path taking her through areas still marked by combat evidence. She passed soldiers establishing security positions and noted their professional acknowledgement, a significant change from the casual dismissal she had faced before the attack. The transformation in their treatment was logical given circumstances, but Maya knew from experience that crisis revelations often faded once immediate danger passed. Staff Sergeant Webb met her near the communications building with an expression that mixed respect and curiosity in equal measure. "Ma'am, Colonel Vance requests you report to Command Center for operational debrief." He gestured toward a vehicle waiting to transport her, then paused before adding, "That was exceptional work tonight. I've never seen anything like it." Maya acknowledged the compliment with a brief nod. "Training and experience," she said simply, offering no elaboration as she moved toward the vehicle. Webb watched her depart and reflected on the careful neutrality of her response. She had just eliminated 17 enemy combatants while coordinating with multiple friendly elements under fire, yet she discussed it with the same professional detachment someone might use describing routine paperwork. The command center held perhaps 20 personnel managing post-attack procedures when Maya arrived. Conversations paused as she entered, soldiers and officers alike taking measure of the contractor, who had accounted for more than half the enemy casualties. Colonel Vance stood from her position at the operations table and approached with extended hand. "Ms. Chun, thank you for your response tonight. Your actions prevented significantly higher casualties and protected critical infrastructure." Vance's handshake was firm and her eye contact direct, conveying respect that needed no additional words. She gestured toward a side office where they could speak with relative privacy. Maya followed the colonel into the office and waited while Vance closed the door. The colonel studied her for a moment before speaking. "I spoke with JSOC," she said without preamble. They provided limited background, enough to understand you're not actually civilian IT support. What I need to know is your current operational status and how your presence here fits into whatever mission you're actually conducting. Maya considered her response carefully, weighing operational security against the practical necessity of coordination with the base commander. My technical work here is legitimate, she began. The contractor position provides cover while I conduct assessment of regional security vulnerabilities. Tonight's attack was outside my anticipated scope, but fell within my authority to engage. My background is special operations, medical retirement 18 months ago, but I maintain operational capability and advisory status. Vance absorbed the information and nodded. Your medical retirement was mentioned. Given what I witnessed tonight, I assumed the retirement was more political or administrative than physical incapacity. Maya's expression remained neutral. The injury was real and the retirement was procedurally correct. The advisory role allows continued service in limited capacity while maintaining cover for sensitive assignments. Tonight required me to exceed those limitations because the tactical situation demanded immediate response. The colonel moved to her desk and pulled up files on her computer. 17 confirmed hostile eliminations, she said, reading from the casualty report. Multiple tactical interventions that prevented breakthrough at critical points. Professional coordination with our defensive elements using proper procedures and terminology. Ms. Chun, you operated tonight at a level that suggests extensive combat experience, and I need to understand if there are operational considerations I should be aware of going forward. Maya met the colonel's gaze directly. My presence here should continue as contractor cover, she said. Public acknowledgement of my background creates security risks for ongoing operations and for personnel who might be associated with my previous unit. However, I'm willing to coordinate with your security staff on defensive improvements and threat assessment based on tonight's attack patterns. Vance considered the proposal and recognized its value. We'll maintain your cover status officially, she agreed. But I'll brief my senior staff privately so they understand your actual capabilities and can coordinate appropriately if situations develop. She paused, then added, I'll also be addressing the treatment you've received from certain personnel on this base. Lieutenant Brennan's conduct toward you was inappropriate before tonight and is completely unacceptable given what we now understand about your background and capabilities. Maya's expression suggested she considered the matter of minimal importance. Lieutenant Brennan's behavior was manageable, she said. The dismissive treatment didn't impact my primary mission objectives. However, if similar treatment toward other contractors creates security gaps or operational friction, that should be addressed systematically rather than focusing on individual interactions. The colonel appreciated the professional response, but recognized that institutional change required accountability. We'll address both the systemic issues and individual conduct, she said firmly. What happened tonight revealed capability gaps in how we assess and integrate personnel regardless of their official status. That needs correction. Webb entered the command center proper and found soldiers discussing the night's events with animation that replaced the earlier crisis tension. The dominant topic was Maya's combat performance, with witnesses sharing observations and comparing notes on what they had seen. He listened to fragments of conversation describing her tactical movement, her precision fire, her calm coordination under pressure, and recognized that her reputation on base had been fundamentally transformed in the space of 40 minutes. Brennan sat alone in the medical building where he had accompanied the wounded soldiers from his unit. The medics had cleared him physically, but he remained in the waiting area, his mind replaying the sequence of events that had shattered his understanding of who Maya Chen actually was. Every dismissive comment he had made, every procedure he had instituted to make her work more difficult, every assumption about contractor limitations, all of it collapsed under the weight of watching her eliminate 4 hostiles and stabilize wounded soldiers with equal professional competence. A chaplain approached and asked if he needed anything. Brennan shook his head and stood, recognizing that staying in the medical building was avoidance rather than necessity. He walked slowly back toward his quarters through a base transformed by combat into something more real than the routine operations he had grown comfortable with. Soldiers he passed were subdued and focused, the casual atmosphere replaced by awareness that threats were genuine rather than theoretical. Maya completed her debrief with Colonel Vance and received permission to return to her quarters. The vehicle that had brought her to the command center remained available for transport, but she chose to walk the distance instead. The physical movement helped process the adrenaline still present in her system, and the route allowed her to observe the base's post-attack procedures and defensive improvements. She passed the supply depot where Brennan's group had been pinned down and noted the blood stains still visible on the pavement. 2 soldiers were establishing additional defensive positions near the building, sandbags and firing points that would provide better protection if future attacks occurred. They glanced at her as she walked past, and their expressions carried recognition that went beyond simple acknowledgement of a contractor on base. The contractor quarters were quiet when Maya arrived. Sarah and the others had likely been moved to secure shelter during the attack and had not yet been cleared to return. Maya entered her space and conducted methodical cleaning of her weapons and equipment, procedures ingrained through years of operational discipline. The M4 and sidearm were contractor issue in the sense that she had authorization to draw them, but the expertise with which she maintained them spoke to training that far exceeded basic qualification. Her tablet showed multiple encrypted messages waiting for review, communications from channels that would mean nothing to anyone who believed she was simply IT support. Maya read through situation reports and updated her own assessment of the attack for transmission to higher command. The hostile force had been professional and well-equipped, suggesting organized paramilitary or potentially state-sponsored elements rather than insurgent opportunism. The base settled into the quiet hours of early morning. Sentries doubled on perimeter posts and patrols moving through interior spaces with heightened vigilance. Maya completed her after-action documentation and secured her equipment before finally allowing herself rest. Sleep came despite the adrenaline, discipline overriding physiology through practice developed across dozens of combat deployments. Outside her window, the base continued its mission under changed circumstances. The attack had been repelled with fewer casualties than the assault force had intended, defended by soldiers who had responded with professional courage and by a contractor who had proven to be far more than anyone had assumed. The morning sun revealed a base transformed by violence into something harder and more alert. Maya walked toward the perimeter where cleanup crews worked under armed guard, removing evidence of the night's combat, while engineers assessed damage to the fence line and surrounding structures. She moved with her contractor badge visible and her demeanor professional, but soldiers who had witnessed her performance now tracked her passage with recognition that bordered on reverence. Staff Sergeant Webb found her examining the breach point, her eyes scanning the approach routes and defensive positions with analytical focus. He approached with coffee in hand and offered her the second cup he carried. "Thought you might need this," he said. "You were moving most of the night." Maya accepted the coffee with appreciation and took a measured sip before responding. "The breach pattern suggests they had detailed intelligence on our defensive layout," she observed, gesturing toward the specific section of fence they had targeted. "They knew which buildings to prioritize and where our response would be weakest. That level of preparation means reconnaissance over multiple days or weeks." Webb studied the area with her assessment in mind and saw details he had missed during the chaos of combat. "You're right," he agreed. They bypassed 3 easier entry points to hit this specific section. He pulled out his tablet and brought up security logs from the previous month. "We had 3 perimeter alarms in this sector over the past 2 weeks, all dismissed as equipment malfunction or animal activity." Maya nodded, her expression suggesting she had expected exactly that information. "Classic pro pattern," she said. "Test the response, map the timing, identify the vulnerabilities. Your security procedures are solid, but they're designed for opportunistic threats rather than organized reconnaissance." She paused and turned to face him directly. "My official assessment report will recommend enhanced counter-surveillance protocols and random variation in patrol patterns. Webb appreciated the professional analysis and recognized he was receiving guidance from someone with significantly more tactical experience than his own considerable background. "I'd value your input on the revised security plan," he said. "Colonel Vance has authorized your integration into defensive planning, though we're maintaining your cover status officially." They walked the perimeter together while Maya pointed out specific vulnerabilities and suggested improvements. Her recommendations were precise and practical, drawing from combat experience that Webb could only partially imagine. He found himself taking detailed notes on his tablet, capturing insights that would have taken his security team months to develop through trial and error. Colonel Vance convened a closed-door meeting in her office with her senior staff, 5 officers who held critical positions in base operations. She waited until the door secured before speaking. "What I'm about to tell you is classified and stays within this room." The contractor Maya Chun, who engaged hostiles last night, is former Delta Force with 12 years special operations experience. Her contractor position is cover for advisory work with continued operational capability. Last night, she eliminated 20 enemy combatants and coordinated tactical response with our defensive elements. The officers absorbed the information with visible surprise. Captain Rodriguez from Intelligence leaned forward with immediate questions forming. "Ma'am, her personnel file shows standard contractor background with IT specialization. How do we not know about her actual status?" Vance pulled up Maya's file on the conference room display. "Her clearance level was always unusually high," she said, pointing to the classification codes. "These specific identifiers indicate DoD Special Access Programs. I missed their significance because I was looking at her official role rather than questioning why a contractor would need this level of access. That's a failure of my situational awareness that won't be repeated." Major Patterson from Operations studied the file carefully. Her background check was processed through JSOC channels. He observed, "I should have flagged that during initial onboarding. Standard contractor checks don't route through Joint Special Operations Command." The colonel nodded acknowledgement. "We all missed indicators because we weren't looking for them," she said. "But the larger issue is how she was treated by personnel on this base, particularly Lieutenant Brennan. I want a comprehensive review of contractor integration procedures and documented instances of dismissive or obstructive behavior toward contractors generally and Ms. Chun specifically." Captain Morris from Logistics shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, Brennan instituted additional checkpoint procedures for contractors about 3 weeks ago. He justified them as security enhancements, but they specifically targeted civilian personnel. Maya Chun had a badge through 4 verification points that military personnel bypassed." Vance's expression hardened. "Document those procedures and any communications Brennan sent regarding contractor oversight. I want a complete timeline of his interactions with Ms. Chun and any other contractors who filed complaints." She turned to Rodriguez. "Pull any formal grievances or informal reports about contractor treatment from the past 6 months." Rodriguez made notes on his tablet. "I'll have preliminary findings by 1400 hours, he said. "There were at least 2 formal complaints filed through the IG channel that I'm aware of, both dismissed at the battalion level." The meeting continued with detailed discussion of security improvements and integration procedures for personnel with non-standard backgrounds. Vance emphasized that capability existed in many forms and that command responsibility included recognizing and properly utilizing those capabilities regardless of official job descriptions or employment status. Brennan spent the morning in administrative purgatory, summoned to report to the adjutant's office for what the message described only as required documentation review. He arrived to find Captain Morris waiting with a thick folder containing his correspondence and policy memos from the previous 3 months. The captain's expression was professionally neutral, but the atmosphere suggested this was not routine paperwork. "Lieutenant, we're conducting a review of contractor integration procedures," Morris began. "I need to walk through the checkpoint requirements you instituted and the justification behind them." He opened the folder to reveal printed emails, policy memos, and incident reports, all bearing Brennan's signature or electronic authorization. Brennan recognized immediately that his decisions were being scrutinized with unfavorable lens. The checkpoints were security enhancements, he said, attempting to sound confident. Contractors have access to sensitive areas, and we needed better verification protocols. Morris slid a specific memo across the desk. This communication from you to security personnel describes contractors as inherently undisciplined and requiring additional oversight. Can you explain the basis for that assessment? The words looked different in print than they had felt when Brennan was typing them weeks earlier. His justification had seemed reasonable at the time, a necessary correction to what he perceived as lax security culture. Now, viewed through the filter of Maya Chen's combat performance and revealed background, those same words appeared as prejudice rather than professional judgment. Lieutenant, I'm going to be direct with you, Morris continued when Brennan struggled to formulate response. Your treatment of contractors on this base, particularly Ms. Chun, demonstrated bias that created operational friction and could have compromised security. Last night, a woman you dismissed as just a contractor saved multiple lives, including potentially your own. That performance gap between your assessment and reality is something command needs to address. Brennan felt his career foundations cracking beneath him. Sir, I didn't know about her background, he attempted. If I had understood her actual capabilities and experience, I would have treated the situation differently. Morris leaned back in his chair with expression that suggested disappointment rather than anger. That's precisely the problem, Lieutenant. You should have treated her with professional respect regardless of her background. Competence exists in many forms, and our job as leaders is to recognize and utilize it rather than dismiss it based on employment status. The fact that she's former Delta Force makes your behavior worse because you missed obvious indicators, but the behavior was wrong even if she had been exactly what you assumed her to be. The administrative review continued for another hour, methodically documenting Brennan's policies and communications. Morris made clear that formal investigation was underway and that Brennan should expect additional interviews with Inspector General personnel. The lieutenant departed the office with his confidence thoroughly shattered and his career trajectory fundamentally altered. Maya completed her perimeter assessment with Webb and returned to the server room where her official duties continued despite the previous night's events. The network systems had remained stable throughout the attack, a testament to the redundancies she had built into the infrastructure. She reviewed logs and updated security protocols, her contractor work proceeding with the same professional competence that had always characterized her performance. Sarah and two other contractors found her there mid-afternoon, their expressions mixing relief at her safety with curiosity about what had actually happened during the attack. We heard rumors, Sarah began cautiously. People are saying you engaged the hostiles, that you eliminated most of them yourself. She paused, clearly uncertain how to frame the question. Maya, what exactly is your background? Maya considered her response carefully, weighing operational security against the practical reality that her cover had been compromised by necessity. I have military experience, she said simply. The technical work here is real, but I also maintain advisory capacity for security matters. Last night required me to use training I don't typically discuss in civilian context. The other contractors absorbed this careful explanation. It answered their immediate questions without providing details that would create security complications. Sarah nodded slowly. That explains a lot, she said. The way you carry yourself, your situational awareness, even your workout routine. We thought you were just really dedicated to fitness. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and the contractors gradually departed, accepting Maya's partial explanation as sufficient for their needs. She returned to her work with recognition that her position on base had fundamentally changed. The dismissive treatment would cease, but would be replaced by attention and curiosity that carried its own complications for maintaining operational security. Webb compiled his security recommendations into a comprehensive report that incorporated Maya's tactical insights without explicitly crediting her contributions. The document would flow through proper channels and result in meaningful defensive improvements, enhanced protocols born from actual combat experience rather than theoretical threat assessment. He saved the file and prepared to brief Colonel Vance, reflecting on how a single night of violence had revealed capability the base had possessed all along but had failed to recognize or properly utilize. The sun descended toward the horizon as the base transitioned to evening operations. Perimeter security had been reinforced with additional personnel and enhanced surveillance systems activated throughout the compound. The attack had failed in its immediate objectives, but had succeeded in transforming the base from routine operations into heightened readiness, a change that would persist long after the damaged fence sections were repaired and the last evidence of combat was removed from the grounds. Captain Rodriguez spent the morning in the intelligence office pulling files that painted an increasingly damning picture of institutional failure. Maya Chen's contractor file sat on his desk alongside 3 formal complaints filed through Inspector General channels, all dismissed without serious investigation. He cross-referenced dates and found that 2 of those complaints had been filed specifically about Lieutenant Brennan's treatment of contractors, submitted by different individuals over a 4-month period before Maya even arrived on base. The first complaint came from a former logistics contractor named Michael Patterson, who described systematic exclusion from planning meetings despite his role requiring that information. Brennan had instituted badge verification procedures that added 40 minutes to Patterson's daily routine while military personnel moved freely through the same spaces. The complaint was reviewed and dismissed with a notation that the procedures represented legitimate security concerns and that contractor objections did not override operational requirements. Rodriguez pulled up the second complaint and found similar patterns. Jennifer Martinez, a communications contractor with top-secret clearance, had documented multiple instances of Brennan dismissing her technical recommendations and assigning menial tasks outside her actual job scope. Her complaint included email evidence showing Brennan's explicit statements that contractors lacked understanding of military requirements and needed additional supervision. That complaint had been dismissed with finding that officer discretion in task assignment was within normal operational authority. He compiled the documents into a comprehensive timeline and prepared to brief Colonel Vance. The pattern was unmistakable. Brennan had not targeted Maya Chun specifically, but rather operated with systematic bias against all contractors regardless of their clearance levels or demonstrated competence. Maya's case had only brought attention to behavior that had been occurring for months, with official sanction through dismissed complaints. Staff Sergeant Webb received notification that morning to report to the Inspector General office for interview regarding contractor treatment policies. He arrived to find a lieutenant colonel from IG sitting behind a desk with multiple folders open before her. She introduced herself as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hendricks and gestured for Webb to take a seat. Sergeant Webb, I'm investigating patterns of contractor discrimination on this base. She began without preamble. Your name appears in multiple reports as security liaison for contractor access procedures. I need to understand what you observed regarding Lieutenant Brennan's policies and how those policies affected contractor operations. Webb had anticipated this conversation since Vance announced the formal review. Ma'am, Lieutenant Brennan instituted checkpoint procedures approximately 3 months ago that specifically targeted civilian contractors. The procedures added significant time to contractor movement across base and required verification steps that military personnel were exempted from. When I questioned the necessity during security meetings, Brennan cited contractor discipline concerns without providing specific incidents that justified the enhanced measures. Hendricks made notes on her tablet. Did you observe his interactions with specific contractors? Webb nodded. Maya Chun in particular faced regular dismissal of her technical expertise. I witnessed Brennan exclude her from security briefings despite her clearance level and system access requiring her presence. He assigned her tasks outside her job scope that appeared designed to minimize her actual technical contributions. After the attack, when her capabilities became apparent, I realized his treatment was based entirely on her contractor status rather than any objective assessment of her competence. The interview continued for an hour, Webb providing specific dates and incidents while Hendricks documented everything. She asked detailed questions about the culture that had allowed such behavior to persist and whether other officers had raised concerns. Webb acknowledged that he had noticed the problematic patterns but had failed to challenge them through official channels, instead attempting to work around the obstacles Brennan created. "You understand, you have some responsibility in this situation," Hendricks observed. "As security liaison, you were positioned to identify these issues and fail to escalate them appropriately." Webb accepted the criticism. "Yes, ma'am. I noticed the problems, but rationalized them as personality conflicts rather than recognizing the systematic nature of the discrimination. That was a failure of leadership on my part." Colonel Vance received Rodriguez's briefing in her office, with Major Patterson and Captain Morris present. The intelligence officer walked them through the timeline, showing how multiple contractors had filed complaints about Brennan's behavior over an extended period. The dismissed complaints revealed institutional failure that extended beyond a single officer's prejudice. "This isn't just about Brennan," Vance said after reviewing the documents. "These complaints were reviewed by battalion and brigade level commands and dismissed without serious investigation. That suggests either inadequate procedures for evaluating such complaints or cultural bias that prevented proper consideration. Either way, it's an institutional problem that requires institutional solutions." Rodriguez nodded agreement. "Ma'am, I pulled contractor retention data and found we've lost 7 experienced contractors in the past year, all citing hostile work environment or lack of professional respect. That turnover rate is 3 times higher than comparable bases and represents significant capability loss." Patterson leaned forward to examine the retention statistics. "If we're losing experienced technical contractors because of hostile treatment, we're degrading our own operational capability. Some of these people had specialized skills that take years to develop. Replacing them with less experienced contractors creates security vulnerabilities and capability gaps." Vance recognized the scope of the problem. "We need comprehensive policy review and training for all personnel on proper contractor integration," she said. "But first we need accountability for the specific failures that allowed this situation to develop." Rodriguez, "I want complete documentation ready for brigade commander review." Morris, "Prepare recommendations for policy changes that prevent this pattern from recurring." Maya spent the afternoon working with Webb's security team on revised defensive protocols. Her technical expertise, combined with tactical experience producing plans that significantly enhanced base security posture. The soldiers working with her showed respect that bordered on deference, occasionally asking questions about her background that she deflected with practiced ambiguity. A young specialist named Chun, no relation, worked beside her configuring surveillance systems with improved coverage of approach routes. "Ma'am, can I ask how you learned tactical operations?" he ventured during a break in the technical work. "I mean, most IT contractors don't have combat experience like you demonstrated." Maya considered her response while testing the camera feed angles. "I served before transitioning to contractor work," she said simply. "The technical skills and tactical background complement each other in security planning." She moved to the next camera position, clearly indicating the personal questions had reached their limit. The specialist accepted the boundary and returned to the technical work. The brief exchange was repeated throughout the afternoon with different personnel, everyone curious about Maya's background, but willing to accept minimal information when she provided it. The base had accepted that she possessed extraordinary capabilities without requiring complete explanation of their origin. Brennan received formal notification that evening that he was being reassigned pending completion of the Inspector General investigation. The orders came through official channels with cold bureaucratic language that made clear his career had entered disciplinary territory. He was to transfer all duties to his deputy and prepare for movement to brigade headquarters, where the investigation would continue. He sat in his quarters reading the orders repeatedly, each pass revealing new implications for his future. The reassignment was not temporary pending investigation completion, but rather permanent with investigation happening at his new location. That distinction meant command had already decided he would not return to this base regardless of investigation outcome. The knock on his door came from Captain Morris, who entered with additional documentation requiring Brennan's signature. The captain's expression carried no satisfaction or anger, just professional execution of unpleasant duty. "You'll report to brigade headquarters Monday morning," Morris said. "Transportation is arranged, and your replacement will arrive this weekend for transition briefing." Brennan signed the required forms. "Sir, do I have any options for challenging this reassignment?" Morris collected the signed documents before responding. "Lieutenant, the Inspector General investigation is independent of the reassignment. You can certainly provide your perspective during their inquiry, but the command decision regarding your position here is final." He paused, then added with something approaching sympathy, "My advice is to focus on learning from the situation rather than fighting the consequences. Your treatment of contractors was documented extensively, and the combat performance of someone you dismissed highlighted the fundamental errors in your judgment." After Morris departed, Brennan packed his personal items with mechanical efficiency. Each object he placed in boxes carried memories of decisions that had seemed reasonable at the time, but now appeared as evidence of prejudice and poor leadership. The coffee mug from his previous duty station, the framed commendation from his battalion commander, the deployment photos showing him with soldiers who had trusted his leadership, all of it felt tainted by the knowledge that his confidence had been built on systematic dismissal of capability he had failed to recognize. Webb found Maya in the server room that evening completing final network security updates. He carried printed copies of the revised security plan, incorporating her recommendations. "Colonel Vance approved everything," he said, setting the documents on her desk. "Implementation starts Monday with enhanced surveillance systems and randomized patrol patterns. Your assessment regarding the reconnaissance indicators was particularly valuable." Maya reviewed the plans and nodded approval. "The changes address the primary vulnerabilities," she said. "The randomization will force any future hostile force to conduct more extensive reconnaissance, which increases their exposure to counter-surveillance detection." She looked up from the documents. "Your security team adapted quickly to the new protocols. That speaks well of their training and your leadership." Webb appreciated the professional acknowledgement. "We had good foundation to build on," he said. "Your expertise gave us direction we needed but couldn't develop internally." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind since the attack. "How many deployments did you do before retiring?" Maya's expression remained neutral. "Enough to develop pattern recognition and tactical instinct," she said, deflecting the specific question while acknowledging the general inquiry. "Deployment count matters less than what you learn from the experience and how you apply those lessons in subsequent situations." The careful non-answer told Webb everything he needed to know about the sensitivity of her background. He accepted the boundary and shifted to operational topics, discussing implementation timeline and training requirements for the new security protocols. Their conversation continued with mutual professional respect, two experienced operators coordinating defensive improvements born from hard lessons learned during a single night of combat. The base settled into evening routine under its enhanced security posture. Sentries walking improved patrol patterns while surveillance systems monitored approaches with better coverage. Maya completed her work and secured the server room, her contractor duties fulfilled despite the ongoing investigation and institutional transformation her presence had catalyzed. She walked back to her quarters through a base that had fundamentally changed its understanding of capability and the forms it could take, even while most personnel remained unaware of the complete story behind that transformation. Word spread through the base over the following days with the efficiency that characterized military and formal communication networks. Soldiers discussed Maya's combat performance in mess halls and common areas, the story growing with each retelling but remaining anchored to verifiable facts. 20 confirmed hostile eliminations, tactical coordination with defensive elements, professional precision under fire. The contractor who had been dismissed and obstructed had proven more capable than most of the military personnel who had questioned her competence. Staff Sergeant Webb briefed his security team on the revised protocols in the training room, using the attack as case study for improved defensive procedures. He displayed tactical maps showing hostile approach routes and engagement points without explicitly crediting Maya's analysis. But his team recognized the sophistication of the assessment. The specialists and sergeants took detailed notes, understanding they were receiving insights developed through extensive combat experience. One of the team members, Sergeant First Class Williams, raised a question during the review. The tactical assessment shows professional special operations analysis, he observed. I'm assuming this came from Ms. Chun, given her performance during the attack. Williams had 20 years' experience, including multiple deployments, enough background to recognize elite training when he encountered it. Webb acknowledged the observation. The assessment incorporates expertise from multiple sources, he said carefully. What matters for your purposes is implementing the recommendations and understanding the principles behind them. He moved the briefing forward, but Williams' comment had made explicit what everyone in the room already understood. Captain Rodriguez completed his comprehensive report on contractor treatment patterns and delivered it to Colonel Vance along with supporting documentation that filled a substantial folder. The evidence was methodical and damning. Brennan's policies had created systematic obstacles for contractors across multiple duty areas, resulting in degraded operational efficiency and elevated personnel turnover. The dismissed complaints revealed institutional tolerance for discriminatory behavior that had persisted until dramatic circumstances forced recognition. Vance read through the complete report over the course of an afternoon, making notes for her own briefing to brigade command. The institutional failures extended beyond her base, she recognized. The complaints had been reviewed and dismissed at battalion and brigade levels, suggesting cultural problems that required attention from higher command. She scheduled a secure video conference with the brigade commander and prepared documentation for broader policy review. The conversation with Brigade Commander Colonel Marcus Thompson was direct and uncomfortable. Vance presented the findings without softening their implications, showing how dismissed complaints had allowed problematic behavior to continue until a former Delta Force operator had been forced to demonstrate her capabilities through combat engagement. Thompson listened with visible concern, recognizing that the story would reflect poorly on the entire brigade if it reached higher command without proper accountability measures already in place. Patricia, this is a significant leadership failure at multiple levels, Thompson said after reviewing the documentation. We need immediate corrective action and long-term policy changes. I want recommendations for contractor integration training across the brigade and review of all pending complaints through IG channels. He paused before adding, I also want commendation prepared for Ms. Chun, recognizing her combat performance and her professionalism in face of discriminatory treatment. Vance appreciated the decisive response. Sir, the commendation presents complications because Ms. Chin's cover status requires maintaining her contractor identity officially. JSOC has requested we limit public recognition to protect operational security for her continued service in advisory capacity. Thompson considered the constraint. Then we do private recognition with her actual chain of command handling official acknowledgement. But I want it on record that Brigade Command recognizes her exceptional performance and the failures that made her situation necessary. Prepare the documentation for JSOC review, and I'll coordinate appropriate recognition through special operations channels. Maya received encrypted communication through secure channels that afternoon, text from her actual command structure acknowledging the combat engagement and confirming her actions had been within operational parameters. The message included brief commendation language and notation that her advisory role would continue with enhanced coordination support from base command. She read the communication twice, filed it in encrypted storage, and returned to her contractor duties without visible reaction to official recognition from the organization that had employed her for 12 years. Brennan packed the last of his belongings under gray skies that matched his mood. His replacement had arrived that morning, a competent logistics officer who would assume the supply duties without inheriting the disciplinary baggage. The transition briefing had been professionally cordial, but marked by unspoken awareness that Brennan was departing under unfavorable circumstances. He made final walk through the supply depot, checking that all documentation was properly organized for his successor. The soldiers working there maintained professional distance, their previous easy rapport replaced by formal correctness that hurt more than open hostility would have. They knew why he was leaving, and their judgment was clear in the careful way they avoided personal conversation. The walk to the transportation staging area took him past the server room where Maya worked. Through the window, he could see her at a terminal, fingers moving across the keyboard with the same efficient precision she had demonstrated since arriving months ago. Brennan paused, considering whether to attempt apology or explanation, then recognized that nothing he could say would address the fundamental failure his treatment represented. He continued walking toward his departure. Staff Sergeant Webb encountered him near the motor pool and offered brief farewell that carried no warmth but maintained professional courtesy. "Lieutenant, safe travels to your new assignment." Brennan nodded acknowledgement and climbed into the vehicle that would transport him to brigade headquarters and whatever consequences awaited there. Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks from Inspector General completed her investigation with interviews across the base, documenting pattern of discriminatory behavior that had affected multiple contractors over extended period. Her report would be forwarded through official channels with recommendations for policy changes and individual accountability measures. She scheduled final interview with Maya to get her direct perspective on the treatment she had received. They met in a conference room with privacy for sensitive discussion. Hendricks began with direct question. "Ms. Chun, you experienced systematic discriminatory treatment from Lieutenant Brennan and faced obstacles that should never have been imposed on someone with your clearance level and expertise. I need to understand how that treatment affected your ability to perform your duties and whether you believe appropriate corrective measures are being taken." Maya considered her response with the same careful precision she applied to tactical assessments. "Lieutenant Brennan's behavior was manageable from my perspective," she said. "The checkpoint procedures and exclusion from briefings created inefficiency, but didn't prevent me from completing my technical work. The more significant issue is the institutional tolerance that allowed his policies to persist despite formal complaints from other contractors. That suggests cultural problems requiring systemic solutions rather than individual accountability alone." Hendricks appreciated the professional analysis. "Do you believe the changes being implemented will prevent similar situations?" Maya nodded. "Colonel Vance has demonstrated commitment to comprehensive policy review and training. Staff Sergeant Webb has incorporated contractor perspectives into security planning. The changes address both specific procedures and underlying attitudes. Whether they persist long-term depends on leadership emphasis and accountability for maintaining those standards." The interview concluded with Hendricks thanking Maya for her professionalism throughout the situation and her service during the attack. Maya accepted the recognition with brief acknowledgement and returned to her work. Her focus already shifted to technical problems requiring solution rather than dwelling on interpersonal conflicts that were resolving through proper channels. Sarah found Maya in the contractor quarters that evening and sat beside her with expression mixing relief and curiosity. "People are still talking about what you did," she said. 20 hostiles eliminated, soldiers saved, tactical coordination that special operations would be proud of. She paused, then asked the question directly. "Maya, were you dealt a force?" Maya met her eyes and made decision about how much to share with someone who had become something approaching a friend. "I serve in special operations before medical retirement," she confirmed. "The contractor work is real, but also provides cover for continued service in advisory capacity. What happened during the attack exceeded my normal parameters, but was necessary given the tactical situation." Sarah absorbed the information with understanding. "That explains everything about you," she said. "The way you move, your awareness, even how you handle the disrespect from people like Brennan. You've operated at levels most of us can't imagine." She smiled. "I'm glad you're on our side." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the confirmation had settled something between them. Sarah would maintain Maya's privacy while understanding more fully who shared their living space. The other contractors would learn through similar quiet revelations, trusted individuals receiving partial truth that satisfied curiosity without compromising operational security. The base transitioned into evening operations under its enhanced security posture, procedures born from hard lessons implemented with professional discipline. Maya completed her daily reports and prepared for the next day's work, her dual role as contractor and advisor now recognized by those who needed to know while remaining obscured for those who didn't. The attack had forced revelation that transformed her position fundamentally, but the mission continued regardless of changed circumstances. Outside her window, soldiers walked improved patrol routes, while surveillance systems monitored approaches with enhanced coverage. The base had paid price in blood and trauma for lessons about recognizing capability in unexpected forms, and those lessons were being institutionalized through policy changes and cultural shifts that would extend beyond a single installation to affect how the entire brigade approached contractor integration and professional respect. Colonel Vance convened her senior staff in the conference room to implement the corrective measures recommended by the Inspector General investigation and approved by Brigade Command. Major Patterson, Captain Morris, Captain Rodriguez, and Staff Sergeant Webb sat around the table with notebooks ready as Vance distributed the policy implementation plan. We're instituting comprehensive changes to contractor integration procedures effective immediately, Vance began. Every military member on this base will complete mandatory training on professional conduct and recognition of diverse expertise, regardless of employment status. The training will include case studies drawn from our recent experience without compromising operational security regarding specific classified backgrounds. Rodriguez reviewed the training curriculum outline and nodded approval. Ma'am, the case studies are structured to emphasize capability assessment based on demonstrated competence rather than assumptions based on job titles. We've included modules on proper evaluation of personnel credentials and appropriate integration of technical expertise into operational planning. Patterson raised an operational concern. The training rollout will require significant time commitment from personnel across all duty sections. How do we balance training requirements with ongoing mission demands? Vance had anticipated the question. We'll conduct the training in phases over 3 weeks, she said. Each duty section will maintain operational capability while rotating through training blocks. Priority goes to leadership positions and personnel with direct contractor oversight responsibilities. She turned to Webb. Your security team completes training first since they interface with contractors most frequently. Webb acknowledged the tasking. We can start Monday morning, ma'am. I'll coordinate with Rodriguez on scheduling and ensure my entire team completes the curriculum within the first week. Morris presented the revised contractor access procedures, eliminating the discriminatory checkpoint requirements Brennan had instituted while maintaining legitimate security protocols. The new procedures treated contractors with appropriate clearances identically to military personnel with equivalent access levels, verification based on actual security requirements rather than employment status. Vance reviewed the procedures carefully. These changes represent return to proper security principles, she observed. The additional verification steps Brennan created served no legitimate security purpose and created operational inefficiency. Implementation of these revised procedures happens today, effective immediately. The meeting continued with detailed discussion of oversight mechanisms to prevent similar discriminatory patterns from developing in future. Anonymous reporting channels would be established, quarterly reviews of contractor integration would be conducted, and command climate surveys would specifically assess contractor treatment. The measures represented institutional commitment to preventing the failures that had allowed systematic bias to persist until dramatic circumstances forced recognition. Maya received formal summons to Colonel Vance's office that afternoon, private meetings separate from her technical duties. She arrived to find the colonel alone, 2 folders on the desk between them. Vance gestured for Maya to sit and began without preamble. Ms. Chun, I want to formally apologize for the treatment you received on this base. As commander, I'm responsible for the climate that allowed discriminatory behavior to persist. Lieutenant Brennan's actions were wrong, but my failure to identify and address the pattern represents leadership failure at the highest level. Maya appreciated the direct accountability. Colonel, institutional failures happen when good procedures aren't followed or warning signs aren't recognized. What matters is the corrective action and commitment to preventing recurrence. The changes you're implementing address root causes rather than just individual symptoms. Vance opened the first folder. Brigade Command wanted to recognize your combat performance officially, but JSOC requested we maintain your cover status. I've prepared commendation documentation that will be forwarded through special operations channels rather than posted publicly. Your actual chain of command will handle the formal recognition appropriate to your background and service. Maya nodded understanding. The private recognition was appropriate for maintaining operational security while acknowledging performance that would otherwise merit public commendation. She accepted the documentation and would forward it through encrypted channels to her Special Operations Command structure. Vance opened the second folder containing policy implementation plans. I also want your continued input on security procedures and contractor integration. You have perspective that my staff and I lack, both from your operational background and from experiencing discrimination firsthand. Your insights will help ensure our corrective measures are effective rather than just bureaucratic responses. Maya reviewed the policy documents with analytical focus, noting strengths and potential gaps in the proposed procedures. She offered specific recommendations for improvement, drawing from her experience with special operations integration of diverse personnel and her recent experience navigating institutional bias. Vance took detailed notes, recognizing valuable expertise being applied to institutional problem-solving. The conversation shifted to operational security topics, discussing lessons learned from the attack and ongoing threat assessment. Maya provided analysis of hostile tactics and probable command structure based on their approach patterns and target selection. Vance absorbed the professional intelligence assessment, once again struck by the disconnect between Maya's contractor cover and her actual capabilities. This base is significantly more secure because of your presence, Vance said as the meeting concluded. Not just because of your combat performance during the attack, but because of your technical expertise and tactical insight that improved our defensive posture. I regret that you had to prove those capabilities under such extreme circumstances before they were properly recognized and utilized. Maya stood to depart. Crisis often reveals capability that routine operations obscure, she observed. The important thing is that the organization learns from the revelation and adapts accordingly. Your leadership during this process has been exemplary. Staff Sergeant Webb conducted the first contractor integration training session with his security team in the classroom designated for professional development. He began with direct statement of purpose. We failed to recognize and properly utilize exceptional capability because we made assumptions based on employment status rather than evaluating actual competence. That failure created security vulnerabilities and operational inefficiencies that recent events made undeniably clear. The specialists and sergeants in the room had witnessed Maya's performance during the attack and understood immediately the capability Webb referenced. He walked them through case studies showing how proper evaluation of credentials and appropriate integration of expertise could enhance rather than compromise security operations. The training emphasized practical application rather than abstract principles, using their own recent experience to illustrate concepts. Sergeant Williams contributed observation during discussion period. We had access to exceptional tactical expertise for months, but failed to utilize it because we didn't look past the contractor label. That's not just discrimination, it's operational malpractice. We degraded our own security posture through willful blindness. Webb acknowledged the harsh but accurate assessment. Recognition and correction of that failure is why we're conducting this training. Every person on this base needs to understand that capability exists in many forms, and our job is to identify and properly employ regardless of whether someone wears a uniform or carries a contractor badge. The training continued through the afternoon with practical exercises and scenario analysis. The security team engaged seriously with the material, recognizing its relevance to their daily duties and its foundation in painful lessons recently learned. By the end of the session, they had developed action plans for improved contractor coordination and integration into security operations. Lieutenant Brennan reported to brigade headquarters and found himself assigned to administrative duties pending completion of the Inspector General investigation. The work was tedious and far removed from the leadership position he had held, a clear signal that his career trajectory had been fundamentally altered. He spent his days processing paperwork and attending mandatory counseling sessions focused on recognizing bias and improving professional judgment. The brigade equal opportunity officer, Major Chun, no relation to Maya, conducted detailed interview as part of the corrective action program. Lieutenant Brennan, your case represents significant failure in professional judgment and leadership. The question before us is whether that failure reflects correctable deficiency in training and awareness or indicates fundamental incompatibility with leadership responsibilities. Brennan struggled to articulate response that acknowledged his errors without destroying what remained of his career prospects. Sir, I recognize that my treatment of contractors was based on bias rather than objective assessment. I failed to evaluate their actual capabilities and credentials, instead making assumptions based on their employment status. That was wrong and created operational problems. Major Chin made notes on his tablet. The fact that one of your targets was former Delta Force operator makes your failure more dramatic, but the behavior would have been wrong even if she had been exactly what you assumed her to be. Professional respect and appropriate evaluation of credentials are required regardless of who you're dealing with. The counseling session continued with detailed examination of specific incidents and development of remediation plan. Brennan would complete extensive training on bias recognition, contractor integration, and professional leadership before being considered for any supervisory role. His career had entered probationary status, where future advancement would depend on demonstrated change in behavior and judgment. Maya completed network security updates in the server room as evening approached, her technical work proceeding with same professional competence that had characterized her performance since arrival. The discriminatory obstacles had been removed, and her expertise was now properly recognized, but the fundamental nature of her duties remained unchanged. She secured systems, documented procedures, and prepared reports with efficient precision. Sarah entered with dinner from the mess hall, having learned Maya's tendency to work through meals when focused on technical problems. "Brought you something," she said, setting the tray on the desk. "Figured you could use actual food instead of whatever protein bars you keep in your desk drawer." Maya accepted the gesture with appreciation. "Thank you. I lose track of time when debugging network issues." She took a break from her work to eat, while Sarah settled into a nearby chair. "The base feels different now," Sarah observed. "People are more careful about how they interact with contractors, more willing to listen to technical expertise. It's like everyone suddenly remembered that competence isn't determined by job titles." Maya nodded. "Crisis often catalyzes change that should have happened through normal professional development. The challenge is maintaining those improvements once the immediate circumstances fade and routine operations resume." They discussed the policy changes and training implementation, contractor perspectives on whether the measures would create lasting cultural shift or merely temporary adjustment. Sarah expressed cautious optimism while recognizing that sustained change required ongoing leadership emphasis and accountability. Maya shared that assessment, understanding that institutional transformation was measured in years rather than weeks. The ceremony was small and private, held in the command center conference room with only senior staff and select personnel present. Maya stood in civilian clothing as Colonel Vance read the commendation citation that would be forwarded through special operations channels rather than posted on public record. The language was carefully crafted to acknowledge her combat performance while maintaining operational security regarding her classified background. for exceptional valor and technical expertise during hostile action on forward operating base Carson, Vance read. Ms. Maya Chan engaged and neutralized 20 enemy combatants while coordinating with defensive elements and stabilizing wounded personnel. Her actions prevented breakthrough at multiple critical points and saved numerous lives. Her professionalism in face of institutional bias and her continued service despite discriminatory treatment exemplify the highest standards of dedication and competence. The assembled officers applauded as Vance presented Maya with the official documentation. A visiting colonel from Joint Special Operations Command stood to Maya's left, representing her actual chain of command. He would carry the commendation back to Fort Bragg, where it would be filed with Maya's classified service record, recognition from the community that understood the full scope of her 12 years of operational experience. The JSOC colonel, who introduced himself only as Colonel Mitchell, spoke briefly after Vance completed the formal presentation. Maya, your performance during the attack demonstrated why we value continued service from operators like yourself. The advisory role allows you to contribute expertise while managing the physical limitations that led to medical retirement. What you accomplished here validates that approach and provides template for how we can retain capability that might otherwise be lost to the force. Maya accepted the recognition with characteristic brevity. The mission required response within my capability parameters. I'm grateful command structure supported my actions and coordinated appropriate recognition while maintaining operational security. The ceremony concluded with informal conversation among the attendees. Major Patterson approached Maya with genuine appreciation. Ms. Chun, I reviewed your security assessment recommendations, and they've already improved our defensive posture significantly. Beyond your combat performance, your analytical contribution has made this base measurably safer. Captain Rodriguez joined the conversation with his own acknowledgement. The intelligence analysis you provided on hostile tactics was exceptional. We've shared your assessment with Regional Command, and it's informing threat evaluation across multiple installations. Your contribution extends well beyond this single engagement. Maya deflected the praise toward practical outcomes. The attack provided data points that needed analysis. Converting that information into actionable intelligence is simply proper after-action procedure. She excused herself politely and departed, uncomfortable with extended recognition despite its appropriateness. Staff Sergeant Webb found her later in the security office reviewing surveillance system configurations. He carried coffee and offered her a cup with friendly gesture that had become routine over the past weeks. Colonel Mitchell said some interesting things during his comments. Webb observed. Advisory role, medical retirement, continued service. Sounds like there's significant story behind your presence here. Maya accepted the coffee and chose her words carefully. My background includes experiences that inform current work. The medical retirement was legitimate. The advisory role allows continued contribution within physical limitations, and the contractor cover serves operational security purposes. That's as much detail as I can provide. Webb nodded, understanding. I've been around long enough to recognize when I'm hearing careful truth that omits significant classified details. What matters operationally is that we now properly recognize and utilize your expertise. The rest is above my clearance level and none of my business. They reviewed the security improvements together, professional collaboration built on mutual respect and complementary skills. Webb's conventional military experience combined effectively with Maya's special operations background to produce defensive protocols superior to what either could have developed independently. The partnership demonstrated the integration principles the base was now teaching through mandatory training. Lieutenant Brennan completed his 6th week of remedial training at brigade headquarters, working through modules on bias recognition and professional leadership. The instructor, a senior master sergeant with 30 years' experience, provided direct feedback that stripped away the rationalizations Brennan had built around his behavior. Lieutenant, the problem wasn't that you didn't know Maya Chan was Delta Force, the sergeant explained during unknown counseling. The problem was that you treated her disrespectfully and created obstacles to her work regardless of her background. Even if she had been exactly what you thought she was, a civilian IT contractor with no military experience, your behavior would have been wrong. Professional respect isn't conditional on someone meeting your expectations of what they should be. Brennan absorbed the lesson with difficulty, his ego still struggling against the recognition that his command philosophy had been fundamentally flawed. But contractors don't understand military culture and operational requirements. He attempted. They need additional oversight to ensure they don't compromise security. The sergeant leaned back with expression, suggesting he had heard this rationalization before. Some contractors lack military experience and need guidance on cultural norms. Others are former military with extensive experience who understand operational requirements better than junior officers. Your responsibility as leader is to assess each individual based on their actual credentials and demonstrated competence, not apply blanket assumptions based on employment status. The training continued with practical exercises requiring Brennan to evaluate fictional personnel files and develop integration plans. He struggled initially, his ingrained biases resisting the objective assessment the exercises required. Gradually, through repeated correction and feedback, he began recognizing how his assumptions had distorted his judgment. Forward Operating Base Carson completed the third week of mandatory contractor integration training with participation from every military member assigned to the installation. The training had been well received overall, soldiers and officers engaging seriously with material that addressed observable problems they had witnessed. Exit surveys showed strong understanding of the principles and commitment to implementing improved procedures. Colonel Vance reviewed the survey results with satisfaction. The training achieved its educational objectives, she told her staff during weekly update meeting. Personnel understand why the changes are necessary and how to implement them. The challenge now is sustaining these improvements through leadership emphasis and accountability over time. Major Patterson presented retention data showing early positive indicators. Ma'am, we've had 3 experienced contractors extend their assignments in the past 2 weeks. Their feedback specifically mentioned improved professional climate and better integration into operational planning. That's encouraging evidence the cultural shift is taking hold. Rodriguez added intelligence from informal channels. The contractor community communicates across installations, ma'am. Word is spreading that Carson has implemented significant improvements in contractor treatment. We may see increased interest from high-quality contractors seeking assignments here, which would enhance our technical capabilities. Vance recognized the strategic value. Good reputation for contractor integration becomes competitive advantage for attracting talent. That benefits operational capability while demonstrating that proper professional conduct produces tangible results beyond just ethical compliance. Maya worked with Webb's security team on advanced surveillance techniques, sharing expertise developed through special operations experience without explicitly detailing that background. The specialists absorbed the training eagerly, recognizing they were receiving instruction that normally required years of specialized schooling. She taught them pattern recognition for detecting hostile reconnaissance, optimal camera placement for coverage without obvious surveillance indicators, and integration of multiple sensor systems for comprehensive awareness. Sergeant Williams approached her after the training session with question about tactical application. Ma'am, the techniques you're teaching go beyond standard security procedures. These are counter-surveillance and advanced reconnaissance detection methods. Where does someone learn this level of expertise? Maya offered her standard careful response. Specialized training exists for personnel who need enhanced capabilities. The techniques are applicable to security operations regardless of where they're learned. What matters is understanding the principles and implementing them effectively. Williams accepted the non-answer with a knowing smile. Understood, ma'am. I appreciate you sharing the knowledge, even if you can't discuss the source. My team and I will put these skills to good use. The training relationship exemplified the improved integration Colonel Vance had sought to institutionalize. Maya's expertise was recognized and utilized appropriately. Soldiers received valuable advanced training, and operational capability improved through effective collaboration. The model would be documented and shared with other installations as template for contractor integration done properly. Sarah found Maya in the contractor quarters that evening working on her tablet. The other contractors had organized an informal gathering to celebrate the policy changes and improved working conditions. "You should join us," Sarah encouraged. "People want to thank you for catalyzing the improvements, even though most of them don't know the complete story." Maya declined politely. The institutional changes resulted from leadership decisions and inspector general investigation, not from individual actions. Colonel Vance and her staff deserve credit for implementing comprehensive reforms. My role was simply performing duties during crisis situation. Sarah sat beside her with understanding expression. "You're never going to take credit for anything, are you? 20 hostiles eliminated, discrimination addressed, base security dramatically improved, all because you were here and did what needed doing. But you deflect every acknowledgement and minimize your contribution." Maya considered the observation. Special operations culture emphasizes mission accomplishment over individual recognition. The work matters more than who receives credit for it. That perspective shapes how I respond to acknowledgement. She paused, then added, "I appreciate the gesture, but large gatherings aren't comfortable for me. Give my regards." Sarah accepted the boundary and rejoined the gathering, leaving Maya to her work. The tablet displayed encrypted communications from her Special Operations Command structure, discussions of her next assignment, and whether her cover at Carson had been sufficiently compromised to require rotation to different location. The decisions would be made by people evaluating operational security requirements against the value of her technical work and advisory presence. The base continued its mission under enhanced security protocols and improved contractor integration procedures. Institutional transformation built on lessons learned through crisis. Maya remained part of that mission, her dual role as contractor and advisor now properly recognized by those who needed to know, her expertise utilized effectively for the first time since her arrival months earlier. The attack had forced revelation, but the organization's response to that revelation would determine whether temporary crisis adjustment became lasting cultural change. Lieutenant Brennan received his final evaluation from the Brigade Remediation Program on a gray Monday morning that matched his diminished prospects. Major Chun sat across the desk with the assessment document open on his tablet, his expression professionally neutral as he delivered the verdict that would define Brennan's immediate future. "Lieutenant, you've completed the required training and demonstrated understanding of the principles we've covered. Your performance on the practical exercises shows improvement in recognizing bias and conducting objective personnel evaluation. However, understanding principles intellectually and implementing them under operational pressure are different challenges." Brennan listened with the hollow feeling of someone who knew the conclusion before it was stated. He had spent 8 weeks working through modules, completing exercises, and attending counseling sessions that systematically dismantled the command philosophy he had built over 6 years of commissioned service. The education had been thorough and uncomfortable, forcing him to confront assumptions he had never questioned. "Your reassignment will be to battalion staff position without direct supervisory authority over contractors or junior personnel," Major Chin continued. "This allows you to apply your logistical expertise while providing time to demonstrate sustained behavior change before you're considered for leadership positions. The assignment is not punitive, but rather appropriate to your current developmental status." Brennan accepted the orders that accompanied the evaluation. The staff position represented significant career setback, a lateral movement that would delay his promotion timeline by years. Officers who entered staff assignments at his career stage typically stayed there, watching their peers advance while they processed paperwork and coordinated administrative functions. "Sir, is there any path back to leadership positions?" he asked, needing to understand whether his career still held potential for recovery or had entered permanent diminished status. Major Chun considered the question with honest assessment. That depends entirely on you, Lieutenant. Some officers learn from experiences like this and emerge as better leaders with deeper understanding of their responsibilities. Others never move past the defensive resentment and spend their remaining service time blaming circumstances rather than addressing their own failures. Which path you take will determine your future opportunities. The evaluation meeting concluded with administrative details about his new assignment. Brennan departed brigade headquarters with his orders and the weight of recognizing that his dismissive treatment of Maya Chun had been merely symptom of deeper leadership failures that would require years to address properly. He had entered the military with confidence in his judgment and emerged from remediation with understanding that confidence without competence was liability rather than asset. He drove away from the headquarters compound through late morning traffic, his thoughts circling back repeatedly to the moment when Maya had dropped 4 hostiles while he had cowered behind vehicle cover. That single incident had shattered his self-conception more effectively than all the counseling sessions and training modules combined. He had dismissed her as just a contractor while she had proven more capable than he could ever hope to become. And that comparison would define his military memory regardless of whatever career recovery he might eventually achieve. Forward Operating Base Carson marked 3 months since the attack with memorial ceremony honoring the soldiers killed during the engagement. Colonel Vance presided over the solemn gathering, reading names and brief biographies of the 4 personnel who had died defending the base. Maya attended in civilian clothes, standing at the back of the formation while Vance described how their sacrifice had prevented greater casualties and protected critical infrastructure. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, followed by rifle volley and taps played by the base bugler. Soldiers dispersed slowly, some visiting the memorial markers while others returned to their duties with the subdued awareness that characterized military communities after combat loss. Maya remained after most had departed, studying the names and reflecting on the randomness that determined who survived engagement and who did not. Staff Sergeant Webb approached and stood beside her without speaking immediately. "For dead, 15 wounded," Maya said quietly, "against 30-plus hostiles with surprise and heavy weapons. The ratio was favorable from tactical perspective, but each loss represents individual tragedy and families permanently changed." Webb nodded agreement. "Your intervention prevented the ratio from being significantly worse. The after-action analysis concluded we would have lost at least 12 more without your engagement at critical points." Maya turned from the memorial. "Mathematical analysis of casualties is necessary for operational assessment, but feels inadequate when facing the human cost." She began walking back toward the base interior, and Webb fell in a step beside her. "Colonel Vance wants to discuss your status," Webb said. "There's been communication from JSOC regarding your next assignment. She asked me to let you know she'd like to meet this afternoon if your schedule permits." Maya checked her mental calendar of technical tasks requiring attention. 1,400 hours in her office, she confirmed. "I'll be there." The meeting convened with Colonel Vance and Colonel Mitchell present via secure video connection. Maya sat across from Vance, while Mitchell's image occupied the large screen on the conference room wall. The JSOC colonel began without preamble. "Maya, we've reviewed your situation at Carson and the compromise of your cover following the attack. While your contractor identity technically remains intact, the widespread knowledge of your combat capability limits your effectiveness in that role going forward. We're offering 3 options for your consideration." Mitchell outlined the possibilities with characteristic special operations directness. First option, rotation to new installation with fresh cover identity, continuing the advisory role in location where your background is unknown. Second option, transition to training cadre at Fort Bragg, using your experience to prepare next generation of operators. Third option, full operational return pending medical review, with understanding that physical limitations may require modified duty parameters. Maya absorbed the options with careful consideration. The medical retirement was based on spine injury from vehicle rollover during classified operation. The injury had healed better than initial prognosis suggested, allowing her to maintain physical capability that exceeded retirement determination. Full operational return would mean combat deployments and the demands that had defined her first 12 years of service. "What's your assessment of my physical readiness for option 3? Maya asked directly. Mitchell glanced at documents off-screen before responding. "Medical review scheduled next month will provide definitive answer. Preliminary assessment suggests you've maintained fitness and capability that would support operational return, though probably not to direct action team. You'd more likely serve in liaison or training support roles that leverage your experience while managing physical limitations." Colonel Vance interjected with local perspective. "Maya, your presence here has been tremendously valuable both for the technical work and the institutional changes your situation catalyzed. Selfishly, I'd prefer you stay, but I recognize the decision needs to serve your career and mission requirements rather than my convenience." Maya appreciated the honesty. "Colonel, the improvements implemented here will persist regardless of my presence, because you've institutionalized them through policy and training. The mission continues independent of individual personnel." She turned her attention back to Mitchell. "I need time to consider the options and await medical review results before making informed decision." Mitchell acknowledged the reasonable request. "Take 2 weeks to consider your preferences. We'll schedule medical review for 3rd week of next month and make final determination based on those results and your choice." The connection terminated, leaving Maya alone with Vance in the conference room. "You're leaning toward operational return," Vance observed. "I can see it in your expression. The advisory role was compromised with medical limitations. But if those limitations are less restrictive than originally assessed, you'll want back in the fight." Maya considered denial, but recognized Vance had read her accurately. 12 years of operational service creates identity that's difficult to separate from the work. The contractor role served its purpose during recovery period, but if medical review supports operational return, that's where I can contribute most effectively. Vance stood and extended her hand. "Whatever you decide, you've made significant impact here. The institutional changes we implemented because of your situation will benefit personnel for years. That's meaningful legacy regardless of where your career takes you next." Maya accepted the handshake. "The legacy is your leadership in addressing systemic problems rather than just individual symptoms. That took moral courage and commitment to institutional improvement." She departed the conference room and walked through the base that had been transformed by crisis and leadership response to revelation. Sarah found her in the server room later that afternoon, conducting routine maintenance on network systems. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Sarah said, reading the signs in Maya's demeanor despite absence of explicit statement. "The way you've been organizing files and documenting procedures suggests preparation for transition." Maya continued her work while responding. "Nothing is decided yet, but there are discussions about next assignment. The contractor role here has been valuable, but may have reached natural conclusion given the circumstances." Sarah sat in the chair reserved for visitors and watched her friend work with efficient precision. "I'll miss having you around," she said. "Not just because you're interesting or because you saved lives during the attack. You made this place better by forcing people to recognize their own failures and commit to improvement. That's rare." The server room settled into comfortable silence while Maya completed her tasks. Outside the window, soldiers walked improved patrol routes under security protocols she had helped design. The base continued its mission with enhanced capability and improved culture. Institutional transformation built on lessons learned when crisis forced recognition of capability that had been present but unacknowledged all along. Maya's next chapter remained uncertain, but her impact on this installation would persist long after her departure. Invisible infrastructure as permanent as the network she had secured and the defensive improvements she had recommended. 6 months after the attack, Forward Operating Base Carson operated with efficiency born from hard lessons and institutional commitment to sustained improvement. Staff Sergeant Webb conducted quarterly contractor integration assessment in the training room, reviewing metrics that demonstrated measurable cultural change. Contractor retention had increased 40% technical expertise was being properly utilized in operational planning, and satisfaction surveys showed marked improvement in professional climate. The assessment included participation from contractors across multiple duty sections. Sarah represented the IT contractors and spoke to the tangible changes she had witnessed. The checkpoint procedures that used to add 20 minutes to our morning routine are gone, she reported. We're included in relevant briefings based on our clearance levels and job requirements. Most importantly, people listen to our technical recommendations instead of dismissing them because we're not military. Webb documented the feedback and noted areas still requiring attention. The cultural shift is real, but needs continued leadership emphasis to prevent backsliding into old patterns. New personnel arriving on base need immediate integration into the improved standards rather than bringing preconceptions from other installations. Major Patterson attended the assessment session and provided command perspective. Colonel Vance has made contractor integration a priority leadership topic at every staff meeting. We track metrics monthly and address any indicators of deteriorating climate immediately. The improvements have become institutional practice rather than temporary response to crisis. The training room discussion continued with specific examples of successful integration. A communications contractor described being consulted on upgrade planning instead of simply being told to implement decisions made without technical input. A logistics contractor noted that his recommendations on supply chain optimization have been adopted and credited appropriately. The pattern was consistent across duty sections, respect, and professional collaboration, replacing the dismissive treatment that had characterized the pre-attack environment. Maya had departed the base 2 months earlier following medical review that cleared her for operational return. Her transition had been quiet and efficient, files organized for her replacement, and technical systems documented with characteristic thoroughness. The server room now had a new contractor who maintained the networks Maya had secured, but the security improvements and defensive protocols she had developed remained foundational to base operations. Webb kept encrypted communication with her through official channels, occasional updates on implementation progress, and requests for technical consultation on complex security questions. Her responses came from Fort Bragg, where she had returned to Special Operations Community, the advisory role complete, and her career path restored to active operational status. The medical retirement had been reconsidered based on her demonstrated physical capability, allowing her to serve in training and liaison roles that leveraged her 12 years of combat experience. Colonel Vance reviewed the quarterly metrics in her office with satisfaction that the improvements had persisted beyond Maya's presence. The contractor integration training had been incorporated into standard onboarding for all new personnel, and the base had become regional model for proper utilization of civilian technical expertise. Brigade Command had requested her staff brief other installations on the implemented procedures, spreading the institutional learning beyond Carson. Captain Rodriguez entered with intelligence update and additional information Vance had requested. Ma'am, I received response from Maya regarding the after-action lessons learned document we're publishing. She provided additional tactical analysis and approved inclusion of her engagement timeline with appropriate classification markings. The document will be a valuable training resource across the theater. Vance appreciated Maya's continued contribution despite her departure. Her professionalism extends to ensuring the lessons from her experience benefit the broader force. That's consistent with everything she demonstrated while assigned here. Lieutenant Brennan marked his 8th month in the battalion staff position with recognition that his career had entered permanent diminished trajectory. The work was competent but uninspiring, administrative coordination that utilized his logistical knowledge without providing leadership opportunities. His performance evaluations noted satisfactory completion of assigned duties, but lacked the strong endorsements necessary for competitive promotion consideration. He had implemented the lessons from his remediation training with mechanical consistency, treating contractors with professional respect and evaluating personnel based on demonstrated competence rather than assumptions. The behavior changes were genuine, but came too late to repair his reputation or restore his career momentum. Peers who had started as his contemporaries now held command positions while he processed paperwork and coordinated supply schedules. The battalion executive officer called him to his office for the quarterly counseling session required for officers in developmental status. "Lieutenant, your performance has been adequate and your professional conduct shows the improvement we discussed during your remediation. However, adequate isn't the standard for advancement. You need to demonstrate exceptional performance to overcome the negative indicators in your record." Brennan understood the assessment was realistic rather than encouraging. "Sir, I recognize my career timeline has been affected by the failures that led to my reassignment. I'm committed to performing my current duties professionally and looking for opportunities to demonstrate improved judgment and leadership capability." The executive officer closed the counseling file. "That's appropriate response, Lieutenant. Keep that mindset and opportunities may emerge. But understand that restoring career momentum after significant failure is difficult and not always successful. Some officers recover, others serve out their remaining obligation in staff positions and transition to civilian careers." The honest assessment carried no cruelty, just realistic acknowledgement of military career progression realities. Brennan departed with understanding that his dismissive treatment of Maya Chun had cost him more than temporary embarrassment. It had revealed character flaws and judgment failures that would define his professional reputation regardless of subsequent behavior improvement. Staff Sergeant Webb received notification that he was being promoted to Sergeant First Class, recognition of his leadership during the attack and his role in implementing the improved contractor integration procedures. The promotion board had noted his professional response to crisis and his commitment to institutional improvement, qualities that identified him for increased responsibility. He shared the news with his security team during their weekly meeting. "The promotion reflects our collective performance, not individual achievement. This team responded professionally during the attack and has maintained enhanced security posture through consistent application of improved procedures. I'm proud to serve with each of you." The team celebrated briefly before returning to operational discussions. They reviewed surveillance footage from recent perimeter activity and noted patterns that might indicate reconnaissance attempts. The analytical skills Maya had taught them were being applied daily, her training producing lasting capability enhancement beyond her physical presence. Sarah received contract extension offer that included increased compensation and expanded responsibilities. The formal offer letter specifically mentioned the improved contractor integration climate and her contributions to technical operations as factors in the enhanced terms. She accepted immediately, recognizing that Carson had become genuinely good assignment rather than simply tolerable duty station. She composed message to Maya through the encrypted channel they maintained, sharing news of the contract extension and providing update on the cultural changes that continued to develop. "Your impact here outlasted your presence," she wrote. "People actually value contractor expertise now because you forced them to recognize their own failures. Thank you for being stubborn enough to maintain professionalism despite the disrespect and capable enough to prove every assumption wrong." Maya's response came 2 days later, brief acknowledgement consistent with her communication style. "Glad to hear the improvements persist. Institutional change requires sustained leadership commitment, which Colonel Vance and her staff have demonstrated. The work you and other contractors do contributes directly to mission success. Proper recognition of that contribution serves operational effectiveness, not just fairness considerations." The message concluded with personal note that Sarah appreciated despite its characteristic brevity. "Medical review results were favorable, and I've returned to operational status. The work is satisfying and utilizes my background appropriately. Take care of yourself and continue the professional standard you've maintained." Forward Operating Base Carson continued its mission under enhanced security protocols and improved contractor integration procedures, institutional transformation that had become normal operating standard rather than temporary adjustment. New soldiers arriving on base received training emphasizing proper evaluation of personnel regardless of employment status, using carefully structured case studies that conveyed principles without compromising operational security regarding Maya's classified background. The memorial markers for the 4 soldiers killed during the attack stood near the command center, permanent reminder of the price paid during crisis that catalyzed institutional change. Soldiers passing the memorial understood they served on installation that had learned difficult lessons and implemented meaningful reforms, culture shaped by leadership response to revelation of capability that had been present but unrecognized until dramatic circumstances forced acknowledgement. Staff Sergeant Webb walked the perimeter at sunset, following patrol routes that incorporated improvements Maya had recommended 6 months earlier. The enhanced surveillance systems monitored approaches with coverage optimized through her tactical analysis. The defensive positions reflected her professional assessment of vulnerability and optimal placement for mutual support. Her expertise had become permanent infrastructure, invisible foundation supporting operations long after her departure. He paused at the fence section that had been breached during the attack, now fully repaired and reinforced beyond original specifications. The location had been transformed from vulnerability to strength through engineering improvements and tactical redesign. The transformation was metaphor for larger changes that had reshaped the base. Weakness revealed through crisis and addressed through committed leadership and sustained effort. The sun descended toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the installation while security teams transitioned to night operations. Contractors worked alongside military personnel in operations centers and technical facilities, expertise properly integrated into mission execution. The base had become what it should have been from the beginning, organization that recognized and utilized capability regardless of its source or form. Maya Chen's name appeared nowhere in public documentation of the base's transformation, her classified background protecting her operational security for continued service. But her impact persisted in policies and procedures, training programs and cultural standards, invisible presence in every contractor treated with professional respect, and every technical recommendation properly evaluated on its merits. The institution had learned from revelation forced through crisis, and that learning had become permanent improvement benefiting mission success and personnel welfare long into the future.